Everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Megha Ralapati. I oversee the Jackman Goldwasser Residency Program at Hyde Park Art Center. Our program invites artists to connect deeply with their own practice in the context of the Art Center and our vibrant community. I'm happy to welcome you to our event today, Manifesting Independence, which was organized by Aaron Hughes, who's currently a resident at the Art Center. And this event is related to Aaron's ongoing Autonomous Democracy Project. To begin, we acknowledge that Hyde Park Art Center has lived its entire 82-year history on traditional Indigenous land. We acknowledge that this is sacred territory of the Potawatomi, Ojibwe, Odawa, as well as the Peoria and Miami peoples. We also pay respect to all the other nations of people whose land we occupy. So I think people have started doing this already, but I invite you to use the chat box to share where you're joining us from and to make your own land acknowledgements. We have a fantastic program today, especially as we make our way into the 4th of July holiday weekend. We are going to run till about 5:30 p.m. Central Time, and we've enabled closed captioning. So at any point, please activate that if you wish using a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I'd like to thank Sputnik Press Cooperative and Arcade Gallery for their support of Aaron's work and for partnering with us in this program. With that, I will introduce our presenters for today. Damon Locks is a visual artist, educator, vocalist, musician, and DJ. Since 2014, he has been working with the Prison and Neighborhood Arts Project, teaching art at Stateville Correctional Center, and he's a 2015 recipient of the Helen Coburn Meyer and Tim Meyer Achievement Award in the Arts. In 2017, Damon was a co-recipient of the Soros Justice Fellowship. His group, Black Monument Ensemble, has performed at the MCA, Chicago, Garfield Park Conservatory, and the Chicago Cultural Center. Damon was also a year-long resident at Hyde Park Art Center in 2018. Michael Rakowitz is an artist living and working in Chicago. His work has appeared in venues worldwide, including Documenta 13, PS1, MoMA, Mass MoCA, the Palais de Tokyo, the 16th Biennale of Sydney, and the 10th and 14th Istanbul Biennials. He's had solo projects and exhibitions locally and internationally with Creative Time, Tate Modern, at Malmo Konstal, at MCA Chicago, Site Santa Fe, among many other venues. He's the recipient of the 2020 Nasher Prize and was awarded the 4th Plinth Commission in London's Trafalgar Square. Michael is also a professor of art and theory and practice at Northwestern University. And finally, Aaron Hughes, who will be guiding our conversation today. Aaron is an artist, curator, organizer, teacher, anti-war activist, and Iraq War veteran. He works collaboratively in diverse spaces and media to create meaning out of personal and collective trauma, deconstruct and transform systems of oppression and seek liberation. Working through an interdisciplinary practice that's rooted in drawing and printmaking, Aaron develops projects that deconstruct militarism and related institutions of dehumanization. He works with a range of art and activist projects, including Just Seeds, Artist Cooperative, Prison and Neighborhood Arts and Education Project, About Face, Veterans Against the War, formerly Iraq Veterans Against the War, and Emerging Veteran Art Movement. Marina Citrin, unfortunately, is under the weather and won't be able to join us for our program today, but Erin might be able to share some of her words so her voice is present at some form in the program. So thank you in advance to everyone for joining us and to the presenters. Erin, I will turn it over to you.
Megha, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody at the Hyde Park Arts Center for all the support in making this happen. And to Marina, even though she couldn't attend, and Damon and Michael, it's really exciting to get to be here with you guys. And I'm honored to see so many amazing people and friends join us from around the country and around the world. Just to get started, I'm gonna share my screen. I've had some computer issues recently, so you might have to bear with me a little bit every now and then. Share screen. So, okay. Autonomous democracy, independent and together, exciting and frustrating, magical spaces of problem solving, manifestations, crowded hot energy, frustrating failures of language, circles, circles, and hands up clapping, silence amongst the people, collective silence, exhale, summer, streets, celebration, tension, beautiful tension and dreams, aspiring youth, hopeful, bright, pop, and love in so loud. Democracy, meaning, dreaming, all together, united, united, unity. Just want to start with some reflective words. As we begin, the way I organized this program this afternoon is a series of rounds of questions. So first I'm going to give a little bit of background of my own and how we kind of got to this conversation. And then I'm going to ask Michael and Damon a question that I'm going to ask you all out there. And anyone is invited to contribute. I think you can either put your name in the chat or raise your hand, and someone on the Hyde Park Art team will help us make sure that you can share. And this is a big experiment, so we'll see how it goes. It could be a mess, but hopefully not. So just starting on this upcoming 4th of July weekend, every 4th of July, I constantly go back to this amazing speech by Frederick Douglass. And I just want to share a few words from that. And he says on July 5th, 1852, in Rochester, New York, he says, "Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and natural justice embodied in the Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humbled offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express the devout gratitude for the blessing resulting from your independence to us? Such is not the state of the case. I say it with the sadness of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessing in which you, this day, rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, independence, bequeathed by your fathers, is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn." In 2005, Angela Davis wrote in her Abolition Democracy, Du Bois pointed out that in order to fully abolish the oppressive conditions produced by slavery, new democratic institutions would have to be created. Because this did not occur, Black people encountered new forms of slavery, from debt and the convict lease system to segregated and second-class education. The prison system continues to carry out this terrible legacy. It has become the reciprocal for all those human beings who bear the inheritance of the failures to create abolition democracy in the aftermath of slavery. And this inheritance is not only borne by Black prisoners, but by poor Latino, Native American, Asians, and white prisoners. Moreover, it uses as such a reciprocal people who are deemed to be detritus of society is on the rise throughout the world. So today, in light of these things, I ask, what is abolition democracy? What is collective liberation? What is direct democracy? How does art play a role in manifesting these things? I kind of help but think of my friends I work with at Stateville Prison and their thoughts about what democracy really means. What is real democracy to them? Is it something known? How can it be manifest? What does it mean? What does it mean to me with my privileges as a white male combat veteran, to a person that is a person that directly played a role in people's oppression? I believe in what Paulo Freire talked about. It's about solidarity. It's a radical position of solidarity with those most impacted. So a bit more about being a veteran before we get started on this 4th of July and thinking about these things and why democracy has become such an important idea in my thinking. I joined the military in 2000, believing in what General Colin Powell said about the military, that it served the cause of peace, freedom, and quote unquote democracy around the world. I'm not sure what his imagination of democracy was, but that was not my experience when I deployed in 2003. When I first got my orders to deploy to Iraq, I was excited, to be honest. I thought I was going to go help get rid of a terrible dictator and build a democracy because I believed in what all these people in political positions within our country had put forth. And I still remember my first mission into Iraq. We stopped at Camp Navistar. We locked and loaded our weapons. We got a convoy briefing about traveling down MSR Tampa. Watch out for suspicious objects in the roadway. Watch out for children in the roadway. Don't stop. Those were our orders. And I remember as we get closer to the border, there was a big concrete barrier there, and it said, "Beware of children in roadway, 1,000 meters." And then I remember passing this big berm and this trench, and boom, I was in Iraq. And there they were. There were these little kids, not even as tall as this desk, jumping in front of my semi-truck, trying to get it to slow down in order to get food and water. And at that time, I thought, oh, these are the people I'm here to help. But those kids, they were still there 6 months later, and they were still there 9 months later, and 12 months later, and 13, and 14, and 15 months later. And not once during my deployment did I ever participate in supporting the Iraqi people. It wasn't until I got back from my deployment and joined Iraq Veterans Against the War, got involved with the anti-war movement, that I was able to actually go back to Iraq and connect with the Iraqi people in a whole different way. And to me, that's created this whole question of, put this whole question of what is democracy that we talk about. And in the midst of my deployment, all my beliefs crumbled. And the only thing I was left with, the only thing I could imagine had any meaning was art, because I knew it was creative and I knew it wasn't destructive. And so I've been trying to think a lot about how these two things are connected and push against each other. And I want to share a few more things. A big part of that work for me was, the military is an authoritarian institution, and yet is sometimes talked about as a democratic institution. And so what does it mean for people that coming out of the military to experiment with having a voice, having agency, speaking? And Warrior Riders has been a big part of that, trying to create meaning out of trauma, while simultaneously not trying to position our trauma as, or our position as we're not the victims of our occupations abroad. Those are the civilians and people that our military has occupied. And so continuously being conscious of this complete power differential and trying to situate ourselves within that brings me to this other moment of the NATO summit here in Chicago, in which the NATO gathered here, and Iraq Veterans Against the War, Afghanistan Veterans Against the War marched with Jesse Jackson and Afghans for Peace, demanding an end to the occupation. And I remember thinking about what was happening in the streets, what was happening in this huge manifestation, that's what I believed in. That was people's voices. It wasn't what was happening inside the convention center. It wasn't the voices of the generals and the politicians. And this is, well, what brought me to lifting up, this is what democracy looks like. This is a image from those protests with that slogan that came out of the World Trade Organization protests in Seattle. So with that experience of my own, I wanted to start this conversation by asking Damon and Michael to share an experience when you felt a sense of collective political agency. Damon, will you start us off? And I'm going to stop screen sharing.
Yes, thank you for that, Aaron, for that context. I appreciate it. I wanted to add, to your Du Bois and your Douglas quote and say that what brought to mind was, Public Enemy were the ones that made kind of crystallized a thought around 4th of July for me, because when I was a kid, I just, I liked the sparkly lights, but I hated the explosions, and I couldn't figure out why the bombs bursting in air was like a good thing, And when Public Enemy said, "Picture us cooling out on the 4th of July, and if you heard we were celebrating, that's a worldwide lie," that was enough for me to be like, "Oh yeah, yes, thank you for someone else for saying something." But your question about impactful moment of kind of political democratic collectivity as seen through my art practice, was that the question, Aaron?
No, just if you want to tell a story of a moment in which you feel like you felt this experience of feeling a sense of political agency.
There's there have been many times that things have shifted for me, that have created things that have changed my trajectory politically. There are times that have been really like moving and make me feel as though that there are possibilities and hopes. I'd say the former were always kind of somewhat jarring and like maybe dissimilar, not the same as your experience, but something that has that made me feel completely different about the world around me, which was my first semester at Stateville. And going into Stateville for the first semester of teaching with Prison and Neighborhood and Arts Education, Prison and Neighborhood Arts and Education program. My first semester teaching there was bracing and challenging. Going into Stateville for the first time, and seeing what seemed to me a preponderance of Black men, kind of broke my heart, and changed my kind of perspective forever. And doing the work of the first project, where I was collaborating, making an animation project called Freedom Time with the guys on the inside, was beautiful and like revelatory, and the conversations we had were deep and inspiring and saddening and all of the things. And walking into prison and feeling all of those, a variety of feelings about how the justice system has created this, and how we have created this, and how if people could see what this looks like, then maybe it would change, and having incredible conversations, and then coming out and, Mike Brown was murdered, or various other people were murdered. Um, it 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 was a moment of, you know transformation for me. It inspired me to make work that made connections and brought proximity to people that don't have a connection to, people on the inside of prison. Um, it made me make work differently on the outside, made me um, reach out to people and make work in collaboration with people. So I would say that, and I'm not sure if this answers your question, but the impact of working at Stateville was something that literally changed my trajectory and my life, and kind of like informed and confirmed and propelled my kind of political belief system in connection with my art. So it helped me form ideas from, continuing to work at PNAP to working with dancers in the Austin neighborhood of Chicago, making the music of the Black Monument Ensemble. So does that answer your question, Eric?
Well, I think it cracks the door into what, this is I don't think it's a question to be fully answered, but I feel that impact, even virtually working with the guys at Stateville. At the end of every class, there's just like this massive feeling. Michael, would you share a moment that you felt the sense of collective political agency?
Yeah, thank you, Aaron, and thank you to everyone at Hyde Park Arts Center for welcoming us here. Damon, I love everything that you said, and I kind of want to continue some of the trajectories of what it was that you were thinking about, and to be in the space that you've laid out for us, which for me, like I really appreciate all that you're saying about proximity, and especially when you're talking about proximity in relationship to a place like Stateville, or the carceral system in general that really seeks to isolate. When we talk about proximities and we talk about them in relationship to what you're framing out for us, Aaron, with talking about moments when we felt a sense of collective agency. It really gets me, kind of understanding a bit more, the way in which that question, is a funny one, because you're asking us as individuals to reflect on a time when we felt a sense of collective political agency. And what's interesting about the question is, like, I can feel it in my body, but maybe somebody else who's part of like that time or that experience, maybe they feel differently. And so your question makes me think about, the conversations we've had about demonstrations, for instance, or moments of rally, like the way in which those kinds of tactics get deployed is often something that people expect. They expect to see people holding space together on the streets and demanding things together. Um, and that the critique that's often brought against these demonstrations, that it continues to kind of operate in the realm of what's expected. And then, there's the things that we can talk about in terms of all of our work with interventions and doing things that kind of estrange the tactics a little bit, to create more moments of surprise. But if I think about the function of the demonstration, it's often, for the people who are in the demonstration as well as the people who are watching it, and maybe even more so. Because in those moments, you realize you're not alone. And what power always tries to do is to isolate, and to create the sense that you don't have proximity to one another, that you're alone in your thinking. And then you start to question the validity, and everything else that comes with those darker moments of doubt. So I think about when I feel a sense of collective agency versus when the collective feels the sense of collective agency. And so I can tell, stories about multiple projects, but I think for me, what I've always appreciated about your work, Aaron, and the work of a lot of our colleagues and comrades, here and elsewhere, is the way in which it requires a certain kind of slowness, that a lot of our works are about an accumulation of people that eventually make a community. If I think about the Tea Project, for instance, of yours, or if I think about, in my case, importing Iraqi dates to the US for the first time in 40 years through the reopening of my Iraqi grandfather's import-export business. It really was a project that was an experiment in storytelling. And what I didn't expect was that the impossible task of trying to import these things from Iraq, something that was sweet in the midst of a time when there was so much bitterness, would be able to accumulate a community of people in Brooklyn, where the store was located, and in Baghdad, with people who wanted to see the shipment actually succeed, and even created agents, you're using the word agency, but created agents in places where I didn't expect for there to be agents. So as this kind of like faltering import project eventually yielded not 1 ton of Iraqi dates, but only 10 small boxes, which was the only thing that could be saved from something that had to be scuttled because of the refugee crisis in 2006. Even the customs broker, who's supposed to maintain like total objectiveness, had to turn around to the inspectors with Homeland Security, who said that it was illegal to import anything from Iraq because we were, quote unquote, at war with the country. And the customs broker turned around and more or less accused them of being warmongers and said we're supposed to be rebuilding the country at this point. So there's moments like that when you get, and I would get these missives and bureaucratic emails as an importer exporter. But what you realize along the way is that you've brought people along, or people have joined you, and so I feel like those projects allow for those kinds of demonstrations to happen in a manner that's maybe, continuing the legacy, or is adjacent to the legacy of what happens on the streets, but maybe slows it down, in a different way, or makes it a little bit weirder, so that one can see that the quotidian things of, trying to get something from one place to another, in the midst of siege is completely impossible.
Yeah, well, I would hope it's about democratizing all the spaces, you know, those um, microcosms to the macro and the accumulation of those over time. Let me go back to sharing the screen and open it up to everybody. In February 2011, talking about accumulation, rejecting the undemocratic actions of the then Wisconsin governor, Scott Walker, an act of direct democracy, thousands of people occupied the Wisconsin state capitol building in Madison to defend worker rights. The occupation followed the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia and coincided with a massive movement in Egypt's Tahrir Square, which led to the overthrow of dictator Hosni Mubarak. Later that year, inspired by those actions and demanding a truly democratic response to the economic crisis, people began occupying Zuccotti Park near Wall Street in New York, launching the Occupy movement. So I just share those all as these examples of how one thing builds off of another, and that's just this one little glimpse of history. And I can't help but think about this broader history going back to Frederick Douglass. But I want to turn it to everybody that's here, which hopefully will work. You know, in this reflective space, you know, does someone have a experience that they felt this sense of collective agency that they would want to share? A story about that? And I don't know, Mega, if there's a way for me to open that up or how that works. I think if someone would want to share an experience of their own around um, political agency or their experience with direct democracy in the streets or otherwise, I think you can put your name in the chat or maybe raise your hand. It's hard to believe that. Oh, go ahead, Damon.
I was just gonna,
I think Allison or Amy.
did someone raise their hand?
I don't know. No, go ahead, Damon. It's
Well,
funny, you know, in person, I always appreciate moments of silence, and like these perhaps awkward moments to create enough space. But virtually, it's really hard to tell. What were you gonna say?
No, I still was just thinking about the question, you know, and and I think I just wanted to clarify a little bit because I think my answer still lies in experience in Stateville, you know, and I feel like each project, especially the animation projects, each projects that we finish and we make and we can get out of the prison, it feels very much like a group effort, you know, and as the person that gets to shepherd it somewhere, like I feel like I'm that, you know, that person that's like grabbing the stuff and taking it out into the world. So the freedom time and the long-term animation projects are are things that I feel because they took so much like kind of so much intensity to make them happen. I really feel that is a group collective effort that is that I get to also see it in action because I work with high school students through a program called Space. So I share all that work like every year with students and have discussions about the work. And so it's just because this kind of perpetual thing that keeps happening. So I just want to add that in.
No, thanks, Damon. And I see a bunch more videos popping on. So I don't know if anyone else wanted to share about this experience with a sense of collective agency, whether that was in an artwork or in a movement. I'm going to go on to the second round, but now hopefully people are getting warmed up. I know there's so many people, brilliant people here, that I hope, even though, we have a little bit of a panel, that we can also create a little bit of a broader conversation. So Damon, I'm going to turn back to you. And, in this piece we played earlier, and in talking to you, I've heard you talk about this idea of a forever momentary space and keeping your mind free. Can you share a time that you've felt that? And can you say a bit about how your creative practice is an experiment in creating temporary spaces and moments of freedom?
Yeah, well, my art practice, I think in general, I think of as an experiment. I think of it as an experiment in intention and experiment in collaboration, and for the most part, it is an experiment in communication. I've always really thought that what that if we think about the systems that try to control us, I feel like the best defense to that is like communicating ideas. So my art is, I feel like it's an experiment in communication and kind of how to generate conversation and ideas, and how to generate friction, excitement, and questioning through work. So the practices of making sound and the practice of collaborating on work is really about how do we deal with each other as humans on this planet. I feel like art is just a category to describe something that is really just life. It's just really us trying to live with each other and trying to be better people. So, well, what medium do we use to try to be better people and try to communicate better? So sometimes that's painting, and sometimes it's playing drums. So for me, my most active practices that I'm in right now always give me that sense of experimental, temporary and like long-term feelings of freedom. So musically, on many levels, does this get expressed? Like when I'm trying to make a song that lyrically expresses an idea that is like now, forever, momentary space. That song speaks about the first verse speaks about the instant people take flight, and the second verse talks about this idea of being able to turn the dial back to a time where nobody died, that we have the power to stop this moment, and then the third verse is about having the language and the rhythm already established to create something that hasn't been done before. And that lives in the now, in the forever momentary space. There's always this possibility, right? So there's that idea of making the lyric that will then you send off into the world and people pick up the lyric. But within that, you have the blending of harmonies, and I'm working with the singers to emphasize and de-emphasize and add color and all of these things, and the layers of meaning within their tones, whether it's, whether you're feeling soulful, whether you're hearing a gospel melody, what that cues in the human body. And then there's the there's the drummers that add multiple languages of rhythm, from the Dana and Arif know full well languages of African diaspora of rhythmic messaging, that gets layered in, so those are the kind of the like, oh, and then there's the sampling. But you get to have all of that within one song, and that doesn't even talk about the experience of working with 9 other people to make, or 8 other people to make a song work, the language that Angel Bat Dawud brings on the clarinet, or Ben Lamar Gay with the cornet, that's one aspect of a freedom that I feel when a song is released and done in partnership with a large body of people. And then, we can bring in dancers, we can bring in all types of things. Working at Stateville to collectively come up with a project and execute the project, when oftentimes there's so little resources to create the project. And when you pull that off and people get to see their work, both the people that made the work and the people outside get to see the work, that is a wonderfully liberating experience, to get feedback on that work and to share in that sense of accomplishment is super liberating. And then to take all of that work and walk into a classroom, create work and create new work and share that work, and have the ideas from 11th and 12th graders at Sarah E. Good on 77th and Holman, engage with those ideas and create new ideas and create new projects based on their thoughts and feelings. I mean, it doesn't get any better. I feel very lucky and privileged to be able to work in those circles. So every day I get to do something that helps with that sense of feeling freedom.
Yeah. Michael, your work often involves reimagining and transformation of objects and materials that change their meaning. As you say, every weapon is a tool if you hold it right. Can you speak about how reimagining our relationship with materials and objects is a part of building a different set of social relations, is a part of manifesting political agency, freedom, democracy?
Well, I think that there's always for me been a kind of embeddedness in objects that go beyond just materiality, that there's something to this thing. My son is 7, and so he's going through this amazing Marvel phase. And so we're watching all of the Marvel movies together, and we were watching Doctor Strange, I think a couple of months ago, and there's this great scene where the character Baron Mordo is like explaining to Doctor Strange that the stick that he's fighting with is a relic, because some objects, because the energy is too much for us to hold, we embed them in objects and they take the strain for us. And so I've often thought about objects uh, as having power, and I think that came from growing up the son of an avid baseball fan. My father, and taking us to places like Cooperstown, and and eating, the ball that was used in a certain game, or the bat, that was used by a certain player, was always like the portal, towards being in that place that I couldn't be in, time wise. But by sharing space with that relic, I was able to. And and interestingly enough, studying to be an artist, and studying to be an artist in the contemporary sense, I don't think that I really spent a lot of time understanding what art history was in undergraduate training, but have more recently come to terms of what that is, as I'm thinking about just like the colonial foundation that every museum sort of stands on top of, and thinking about um, the way that art kind of came to be. It used to you didn't have a name for this in earlier civilizations. I refuse to use the word ancient, but like if we talk about earlier civilizations, there wasn't a separate word for art and architecture, and often this was referred to as techne, the craft. And if I think about our history of museums and art objects, so much of it was about what could be defunctioned, and put inside a vitrine, away from the people that used the object, and it becomes a curiosity for others. And so when you're talking to me about the kinds of projects where I've started to like really mobilize what the object is, by allowing for it to kind of like speak its own provenance, is actually something that I think has a root in that childhood experience, but also wanting to bring people closer, to use Damon's words earlier, like to create that proximity where people can't distance themselves from something. So in the project that you're talking about, Every Weapon is a Tool, if you hold it right, which is an inversion of an Ani DiFranco song, is really about this kind of relationship that you and I have had since 2006, 2007, where we've collaborated on these projects like Enemy Kitchen, where my mother's recipes from Baghdad are cooked by local Iraqis here, and with combat veterans like yourself and other comrades from Iraq Veterans Against the War. But a tributary of that work was this project where we were also fishing for carp, which is labeled as an invasive species here. And it was really about kind of like, again, like going back to what Damon was saying before, like looking at this primal scene of humanity and why it is, that we even want to live together. And there's actually this great book called The Omnivore's Dilemma that was written by Michael Pollan in 2005. And in it, he talks about how cities formed when people decided to cook together. And so this dish that we were making, called masgouf, which is the national dish of Iraq, using carp that is not wanted here. But then if you think about in 2014, Iraqis were not allowed to eat the carp from the Tigris because ISIS was throwing bodies into that waterway, and there was a fatwa against the fish. It was this way in which we created a kind of proximity to this primal scene in human history, where people always talk about Iraq as being one of those primal scenes. But for us to be able to kind of take the unwanted visitor fish from the waterways here and to prepare it together with Iraqis and veterans, you were all using your bayonets that you gave up, in order to kind of skewer the fish and to hold it upright next to the fire. And it allowed for there to be this like communing with time, a recipe that comes to us over time, but that smell is now, that taste is now, and that moment of transformation is now. So how do we take all of these things and rescue them, or allow them to, let's use another word, escape, from the vitrine that's called the ancient or called the antique, and reconnect them, with the people who move here from Iraq. They're here because we were there. And to start to like really kind of have a conversation about these things, but that conversation starts to become a little more magical, in my opinion, because we're taking a lot of those things and the fish becomes the relic. The fish starts to get imbued with those strains that we can't take anymore, but it does become this moment of nourishment, so that there's a lot of different things in these projects where I feel like, we've set up these kinds of prototypes of how things could be, if veterans and emigres fish together, for carp, or if they're cooking together and all of a sudden the weapons that were used for making war used for making dinner. But then I'm also thinking about more personal relics and in a project like Dar al Sal, where I took the invitation of doing Enemy Kitchen in Dubai, which wouldn't have really made sense because that moment of friction and the intersection of hospitality and hostility doesn't exist in the same way there. But I told them that if they wanted me to do a project like that, I would open up the first Iraqi Jewish restaurant in the Arab world in over 80 years. And the curators were just suicidal enough to say, that's a great idea, let's do it. And what was wonderful about that 1 week that we opened up that ghost restaurant was that I got to like mobilize all of these family heirlooms of things that had to be smuggled out of Iraq when my family left under duress, and to serve food on those things. And we even got the former serving trays from the great synagogue of Baghdad. And so it created this moment where you had Iraqis and Palestinians and Jordanians and Lebanese all sitting at this table where suddenly their Jewish neighbors had reappeared, through the context of this flatware. So for me, I'm always thinking about the sourcing of material, because I think in that sourcing, it's not just about where it comes from, but everything that material has been through, or everything that object has been through, before it gets to me or it gets to any of the other people who participate and help me build these projects.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Damon. Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate this idea of space and time and material. I want to pull some comments from the chat. Mel, he wrote, in regards to this question of experiences of agency. He said, I'm not sure if this fits your question, but as a director of the PPRC photography project in St. Louis, I did a project with children and youth in juvenile detention center at Grand. We showed the photos they took in an exhibition in the neighborhood library. This brought the neighborhood parents and kids and friends of the kids in to see the show. The kids in detention could not be there, but we took photos. All the detainees were Black, all 10 to 18 years old. And I think what it reminds me a lot of what Damon was talking about in regards to the Prison Neighborhood Arts Education Project and being able to engage and bring community together around art coming from the inside. Nikki wrote, thinking about democracy, I would like to say that I have felt some collective agency during voting process, but even desired results felt distant. The times I have felt collective agency has been on much smaller scale, working together with small group to achieve a specific goal, or marching in the streets with strangers, painting a mural with strangers. And I want to turn to, I see some amazing friends and allies here that I would love to hear if you would like to share Dorothy, I see you nodding. Would you want to say a little bit? I feel like you're such a, been involved with the movement for a long time. Do you want to talk a little bit about an experience, a sense of agency, whether it's through your work, artwork, or through the movement?
Well, one thing that came to mind is I am born and raised in Chicago, and I'm a senior citizen, so I'm 66 years old. And at the time that I went to high school, I left Inglewood to go into 63rd and Walcott, which was then a very segregated community. And actually, the Nazi headquarters was not far away from Lindblom Technical High School, where I went to school. And so we decided as African American students, and there weren't a whole lot of us at that time, but by the time we graduated, the school was pretty much all people of color because the whites had fled from the community. And so at age 13, a group of people from Lindblom decided that we were going to advocate for Black studies at Lindblom. And so we staged a walkout, and we were all barred from coming back to school. And one of the things that I remember vividly was having a brother who had just gotten home from Vietnam. And my mother sent my brother to school to get me back into school and to be re-enrolled. And the counselor said to my brother about, you need to teach your sister how she needs to behave if she really wants to be successful in this country. And she went on and on and on. And my brother exploded. And this is the first time I saw him explode like this. And he said, I just got from Vietnam where I was fighting for other people's freedom, and you're gonna tell me my sister doesn't have freedom here? And he exploded in such a way that she was terrified, and she signed the papers to put me back in school immediately. And so that experience stays with me as, when we're talking about democracy and how we fight for democracy in other places, how we don't have it here as people of color. And how all over the years, starting from age 13 through where I am now, I've been involved in a number of movements where people of color, we're fighting for agency. And it's just, I've met some incredible people. I've formed some incredible relationships. However, still in this country, I'm fighting for agency.
Yeah, Dorothy, I appreciate it so much because it immediately brought up so many people in my mind, like Medgar Evers, who was a veteran as well, and so many of the kind of early civil rights organizers in the South, World War I and World War II veterans, that they didn't experience democracy abroad. They didn't experience democracy in the military, and they came home to fight for it. And I'm there's definitely a, when that idea of liberty is so kind of presented and yet so distant, how does that inspire, like the contradiction that Frederick Douglass pointed out in that early quote, how does that inspire the struggle to manifest the real freedom, the real democracy? And, this is maybe a tangent, but there is a real co-opting of veteran identity as, white, male, conservative, combat veteran, and that's not a majority of the people who serve in the military. And a majority of the people that serve in the military are minorities, Black, brown, coming from poor communities that don't agree not only with the foreign policy often, but often, don't agree with all the nationalist rhetoric. They do it because it's a social mobility. And so it's interesting to think about the offering of that as a social mobility versus, and as a apparatus of quote unquote, one interpretation of democracy versus what you're talking about and the democracy that people fight for in the streets, and they fight for it in a different way. And it doesn't happen when people wearing uniforms. Are there, Mel, you wrote in the chat, I'm wondering if you wanted to share a little bit more about your experience in St. Louis, right? It was St. Louis?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can hear me now?
I can, yeah.
Well, first of all, this has been amazing to be part of this Zoom. So thank you very much. And I directed something called the Public Policy Research Center Photography Project in St. Louis from 2004 to 2013. And then the Public Policy Research Center was dissolved, but we worked with all over the St. Louis community, all different kinds of people from all different cultures, all different backgrounds, all different ages. We taught people how to photograph their own lives from their own perspective, which is, this was modeled after Wendy Ewald's work. She's a professional photographer. I'm an artist, but I know a lot about, or knew a lot about photography. And so I wanted to take this out to the community. One of the places that we worked with mostly community groups that were already out in the community, already doing good work in the communities. So we partnered in this case with the Prison Performing Arts, which is a group that works with prisoners, mostly dance, drumming, and theatrical works. And but we went in and worked with kids. The youngest was 10 in juvenile detention, and the oldest were 18. And all of them, I'm going to say boys and girls, to me, they were boys and girls, were Black, all, 100%. And, but they were great. It was wonderful. I felt like it was such an important experience for me to have to, walk in that door, go through, security, see how, I didn't see a lot of their lives, but we took pictures of, when they were lined up and they had to have their hands behind their back, we took pictures of their bedrooms, well, their cells, and we took pictures of their interaction with the dancers and theater people. The only problem was, of course, we couldn't show anybody's face because they were young. But I taught them how to do Photoshop, or actually we used something called GIMP, which is free. And that they could use it if they ever got a hold of a computer and a camera. And so they came up with some really ingenious ways of hiding their faces, and we drew masks and they used them some, or we whited out their faces and had halos around their heads and stuff like that. So, but the show, we always did the show in the neighborhood where the photographs were taken. And in this case, it was North St. Louis, a little bit on the edge of North St. Louis in a library. And so the parents could come. We did show the kids the photographs that they took, matted and printed out and matted. And so I feel like in almost every project we did, I got a lot more out of it. I got so much out of it working with, but especially the working with Prison Performing Arts was a big, very important memory for me and experience.
Thanks, Mel. Appreciate you sharing, and I'm sure I know a lot of other folks out there have experiences with art as a space of transformation and empowerment. Speaking of which, these ideas of spaces, going to share another print. And this print is from Freedom Square. It was based on a photograph by Sarah G. Ree, who's from Love and Struggle Photo. She's like a local activist icon. And in the summer of 2016, the Let Us Breathe Collective launched Freedom Square, a 41-day overnight occupation, protest, encampment, block party opposing Homan Square, the CPD, Chicago Police Department black site, where thousands of Chicagoans have been illegally detained and tortured. Initially, the Let Us Breathe Collective launched the occupation at the corner of Homan and Fillmore on Chicago's west side in support of the BYP 100 civic obedience blockade, which shut down police traffic in and out of facility on July 20th. The occupation was relaunched on July 22nd in support of Bluest Lives Collaborative, a collection of activists opposing a proposed Blue Lives Matter city ordinance, which would expand hate crimes protections to police officers. The encampment grew into a community laboratory for police abolition and divestment, providing free clothing, free books, free meals, free art programs for children of North Lawndale, the free sleeping tents for community members, protesters, and neighborhood residents experiencing homelessness. The Let Us Breathe Collective believes that police do not keep us safe, that American policing is an inherently violent system, and that investing in that system escalates rather than heals intra-community violence. Freedom Square was built on the principle that the resources necessary to keep communities safe are restorative justice, education, employment, housing, mental health, physical wellness, addiction treatment, access to nutritious food, and art. The Let Us Breathe Collective. I share that moment of that occupation, did more work to transform and bring light to the ongoing police violence than many years and years of politician banter. And so, what does this one moment of occupation and transformation mean? And I'm wondering if other people have thoughts or experiences with spaces or with that occupation. I know some people were there. I'm not following the chat. Well, I hate to call on people that don't have their images on, so I'm gonna go ahead and switch over to the last question I have for Damon and Michael. Damon, representation and abstraction play into creating meaning and political agency out of struggle. Can you speak to the play and tension between representation and abstraction when you're making that as a part of your work, and a part of that as a work towards liberation?
That is a massive question.
All these questions are massive, open.
I know.
They're like designed for lots of thought-provoking comments.
And that it is doing. Yeah, when I'm thinking about abstraction and representation and thinking about it through the lens of my work, the things that I'm doing, I think that abstraction, okay, I'll start with representation, right? So I think a lot about representation on a very kind of tangible level, like who do you see in the work that I make, what is being represented and what is being created in the work that I'm doing, right? So when we're talking about seeing and hearing and having people that are incarcerated represented in the work, that's important. That's tangible. That's a thing that's impactful. You know, there's the work that comes out of it is filtered through that lens, right? So if we look at the work that I do with music or in collaboration with dancers, whether it's, you know, Move Me Soul or Martine Whitehead or, you know, Keisha. But you see who the people are, and then the work is the sounds, the movements are kind of seen through that lens, right? So representation is important in that way because it gives you a focus, it gives you a subject matter in which that this conversation is about, right? But abstraction is the place for me that allows you to take it into more into spaces that are less delineated, where the conversation really happens. You know, it's the spaces in between, it's the unknowns, it's the joy, the happiness, the sadness, the things that you can't really describe by writing it out, you know? So there is the, you know, the framework, which might be could be called the representation, and then there's all the intangibles that happen, and the intangibles are where we live. You know, the intangibles are the spaces that touch us the most. It's the things that we can't put our finger on, but we relate to. You know, I often talk about some of the work that I do, a lot of the work I do, engaging in the Black nod. Okay, and the Black nod is the walking down the street, seeing another Black person and being like, hey, what's up? You know, and the Black nod is a abstraction. It's intangible. It's just a thing. It's a thing. It's a relationship. It's a acknowledgement. It's a form of communication that, you know, is unagreed to. It just happens, you know? So the things that just happen, the spaces in between, the things that happen when you put these things together, the unanticipated, the abstraction, that's where we actually find most of the meaning in, you know, the things that we can't prescribe. So the abstraction to me is the life's blood of the representation, you know, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense to me. It's the tension between the two, and also there's the ability to imagine and create space for that imagination. Michael, over the past few years, you've worked with many amazing people to bring light to the violence embedded with many cultural institutions and highlight their roots in the relationship to colonialism, racial capitalism, militarism, the carceral state. What does it mean to you to democratize cultural institutions?
Well, I mean, I see it as an incredible moment of opportunity and vision. I see it as something that that excites me, and I think that's something that I felt collectively with people. I can say that you know, it's something that I've been able to share you know, thoughts about this, and being in you know, being in struggle with people. And the reason why we're in struggle is often because we took very seriously the possibility of what it meant to become an artist. And we shared in the excitement of being taught about all of these amazing moments throughout art history, when the very question about whether or not something is art is what moves things forward. And if we start to ask questions about what is an art institution, we move those things forward as well. So there's a lot of angst now, because there is just so much entanglement and an entrenchment with the industries that you've mentioned, these industries of harm. And in one sense, you can look at the situation in the United States with art institutions, with museums and board structures, and the presence of people, who profit off these things, and see it as something that's maybe distinctly American, because our funding does not come from the state. But at the same time, it's replicating things where I've had, people who are apologists for, the way that these institutions run, saying that art has always been attached to empire. It's always been attached to money, whether it's the de Medicis, or if you want to look at the Assyrian reliefs that my studio and I are reappearing. If you think about the originals, which were, extracted by the West and then destroyed in Iraq in 2015, those were commissioned by these ruthless kings, like King Ashurnasir Pal II. On all of those reliefs had his standard inscription written on it, which said, Ashurnasir Pal, king of Assyria, king of the world, stepped on the necks of his oppressors, had the heads of his opponents piled up like a tower. So these were not, these were like propaganda in a lot of ways. They were boasts. But the magic of art history is that 2,500 years later, these works that were done, to satisfy the whims and the ego of a king have become vessels of our grief. So what I am interested in exploring is ways in which we can, also have a say in not waiting 2,500 years for something to be okay. And to actually say that just because it's the way that patronage has worked in the past, it doesn't need to be the way that it continues to function. And so if we're going to, demand these institutions to be different, we also have to look at the foundation that a lot of institutions are kind of built upon. And that's more than just, that's more than the land acknowledgement. That's also a core sample of what it means to be presenting work. And one thing I said before is that people have often been separated from their objects, and those objects are presented in museums. And there's people like Ariella Azoulay who write about this and about the imperial crime that is modernity. But I'm also interested in participating, in, the art and the legacy of art that got me excited about being here to begin with. And so if we think about alternative models, there are many. And for me, I'm a lot less interested these days than, in trying to like change the DNA of MoMA, which is not going to change, but to actually exiting MoMA. And what does it mean for all of us to exit MoMA? What does it mean for us to imagine futures of art making and art viewing that are not reliant upon these kinds of pathological entanglements with things that many of us as artists, not all of us, but many of us, are actually devoted to dismantling, And so to recognize also that we operate as contradictions, that we're all entangled in this, but if we have a mutual interest of disentangling, then we're going to need more than one pair of hands to do the disentangling, and there are many different places that are actually like engaging with this, when we think about alternative strategies of not collecting, but also, thinking about art museums, being something that's more akin to the library. There are a lot of different models that are emerging like that. And just, one of the things that I love about libraries is any chance that I get to bring in pop culture, I will, but like that great quote by Keith Richards, who says that when you're growing up, there are two institutional places that affect you most powerfully: the church, which belongs to God, and the public library, which belongs to you. The public library is a great equalizer. It would be incredible to take something like that missive and be able to project that onto what we mean when we're talking about museums or cultural institutions that are not about like hoarding the work, but about being the kind of like the caretaker of the work for the public. And what would a truly publicly owned museum look like? And those are all things that I'm really excited to be in dialogue with others about, as I've gotten involved with Strike MoMA, and also comrades from MoMA Divest, who are not just looking at MoMA. MoMA is the sort of like the gold standard, for what a kind of modern and contemporary cultural institution is. But if we start to kind of trace our own escapes from that system, then we actually have all this other vision that opens up. And if you think about all of those moments that have been exciting in art history, where somebody could take something that is ready-made and say that it is art, then we can do the same thing in applying that breadth of imagination and that depthness of will, or that depth of will, and build something together that we've not seen before, and that will truly serve the public.
Thanks, Michael. I can't help but think that exit, that departure is, away from something that is alienating in so many ways and perpetuating violence, and into the streets, or to the people, to the communities. I think about all the projects people shared today, about how those are directly connected to where people are at in their everyday lives. And these institutions, the idea that art is something separate from that, and it's something separate from our real, political agency, our action, our activism, our communities, I think is the work that we all have ahead of us, is to break that down and prioritize working with people where they're at and with our communities. I know that we're really short, that we're at time, and I want to acknowledge that. And so I guess I wanted to close out with just I want to share a final two prints, or print, and also just let people know that I've been asking all these activists from different parts of the world to share a slogan that inspired them or mobilized them when they were in the movement. And that's where these prints have been coming from. And a part of it's because I don't know other people's background, but I feel like the lineage and the history of the way art and culture and activism have all been so intertwined, and have transformed the world in moments, has often been kind of lost. It's not the dominant history, it's not the dominant narrative. And what does it mean to start looking at those histories and prioritizing those histories and bringing them to the forefront, so we can learn from each other's histories to transform the present. So with that, share this. Hopefully this works this time. I guess last time. Did that work? Is that working, Damon?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, cool. So this is this was a slogan shared with me by Laura Bellotti, and the calligraphy is by Mohammed Gabber. He's a street artist, and this is what he wrote about it. I made this calligraphy in April 2008 when the activists in Egypt called for a general strike all over Egypt. It was an artwork in my project, Graphics Against System, GAS. It was then used online over some of the photographs taken of the riot that happened at the time and spread online. in December 2009, I made another version and used it in street art project with street artists from Alexandria. In January 11th, and for the mobilizing sparking the 25th January Revolution in Egypt, online activists reused it. It spread online in calls for the protest and was printed out on posters and banners to hold in Tahrir Square. In February 2011, during the visit to Beirut, I was surprised to see it done as a graffiti in Hamar and around Beirut by anonymous street artists. And around the same time, I got word from a friend in Cairo that some guy got the design from the internet and printed out T-shirts and was selling them in Tahrir Square for really cheap, around $4. People were loving it, buying it and wearing it in the square. When I returned, I was amazed seeing the calligraphy done on several walls around Egypt, from Cairo to Alexandria, as graffiti on walls by people I do not know. By March 2011, the same calligraphy was used in activists in Beirut in protest against sectarianism, printing on banners and wearing it as T-shirts. At the same time, in Syria, I was told from activists there that they are using it in protests around the country. And so I guess I just leave you with this beautiful design, which says, "Be with the revolution." And with the question for you all of, what does it mean for you to be with the revolution? If anyone would like a print from the series, I'm happy to mail them. I don't really feel like they belong to me. So if you'd like one, please, you can email me your address and I'll send it to you. I'm putting my email in the chat.
Thanks, Aaron. Thank you so much. So if you email Aaron and let him know that you attended this, you get one of these beautiful prints. So that's an opportunity for all of you. Thank you so much to everyone for participating, for your honesty and forthrightness. It was a really fantastic conversation. I'll just flag our next virtual program is scheduled for July 8th. It's a roundtable discussion. Architecture and Black Lives is the title and the subject, and it feature artists Fahim Majid, Adrian Brown, Mario Gooden, and Amanda Williams talking about that subject. So you don't want to miss that.
That's gonna be fire.
Yeah, 6 p.m. on July 8th. There'll be more details in our email and on the website too. But Aaron, thank you so much for organizing this conversation. Michael, Damon, thank you for participating, and everyone else. We send you off into the weekend with a lot to think about, and hopefully many more discussions that will follow this one. I think the way you organize the questions, each of them could have been its own full program. So thank you all, everyone.
Bye.